The galaxy was old. Older than most civilizations could properly imagine. Older than the Veiltheri Dominion, which had ruled 17 star systems for 4,000 years. Older than the Crin collective, whose hive mind stretched across 62 worlds and had not known a moment of silence in 3 millennia. Older than the Sorvathi theocracy, who worshipped the twin suns of their home system and believed, with absolute certainty, that the universe had been created specifically for them. The galaxy was old and it had seen many things rise and fall. But there was one story, one legend, that every spacefaring civilization shared, regardless of culture, biology, language, or belief system. One story that predated almost every modern government, every interstellar alliance, every war and peace treaty that had shaped the known stars. It was the story of the Pale Ones. The name changed depending on who told it. The Veiltheri called them the Gale Mori, the Hollow Walkers. The Crin had no singular name for them, only a collective shudder of data embedded so deep in their shared memory that most Crin weren't even aware it existed, like a scar that had long since healed but still ached when the weather changed. The Sorvathi called them the Unblessed, beings who had somehow survived without the guidance of the twin suns, without the divine warmth of true civilization. Other names existed too. The Pale Ghosts, the Forgotten Builders, the Laughing Warriors, the ones who would not stay dead. But the most common name, the one whispered across trading posts and diplomatic stations and military briefings from one edge of the known galaxy to the other, was simply the Humans. Nobody had seen one in 800 years. Not a confirmed sighting anyway. There were rumors, of course. There were always rumors. A trader from the Outer Reach who claimed he'd picked up a distress signal on an old frequency, and when he'd followed it, he'd found nothing but an ancient ship with writing on the hull that no living linguist could translate. A Veiltheri explorer who swore she'd found a planet, not on any map, not listed in any database, with ruins that didn't match any known architecture and footprints in the dust that were strangely, disturbingly bipedal. A Crin border patrol that detected a ship on long-range sensors, small, primitive by any modern standard, running on what appeared to be a fusion drive that hadn't been seen in the galaxy for 6 centuries, and watched it for 7 hours before it simply vanished. Not into a jump. Not into debris. Just gone. Rumors. Whispers. Ghost stories told at the edges of civilization. For 800 years, the galaxy had operated on a single, comfortable assumption. The humans were gone. Whatever had happened to them, whatever catastrophe, whatever plague, whatever war had finally ended that strange and terrifying species, it had worked. The galaxy was safe. The humans were myth. And myth, as every civilized species knew, couldn't hurt you. Commander Sareth Vel Doran stood at the observation window of Veiltheri Diplomatic Station Kale 9 and looked out at the stars, thinking about myths. She was tall by Veiltheri standards, almost 2 meters, with a pale silver skin and elongated fingers that marked her bloodline as high caste. Her eyes were violet, as all Veiltheri eyes were, and in the darkness of the observation deck, they caught the starlight and reflected it back like 2 small moons. She had been stationed at Kale 9 for 3 years. 3 years of monitoring the Outer Reach, cataloging the slowly expanding border of known space, logging the occasional anomalous signal that turned out to be nothing. It was, by the standards of Veiltheri military service, a deeply boring posting. Tonight something was different. Commander. The voice came from behind her, her junior officer Ensign Pavail, young enough that his skin still had the golden undertones of youth. He was standing in the doorway of the observation deck, and his face was doing something unusual. Was afraid. Sareth turned slowly. What is it? We're getting something on the long-range array. Pavail swallowed. Something the computer can't identify. Debris? Asteroid drift. No, Commander. He paused. It's ships. Sareth felt something shift in her chest. Not quite fear. Not yet. Just attention. The kind of deep, cellular attention that every living thing feels when something in the environment suddenly, fundamentally changes. How many? Pavail opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. The array is still counting, he said. But Commander, it's been counting for 11 minutes and it hasn't stopped. Sareth turned back to the window. Out there in the dark, among the old, familiar stars, something was coming. She didn't know what it was yet. But somewhere in the oldest part of her brain, some ancient, pre-civilized corner of her consciousness that hadn't been touched by 4,000 years of Veiltheri culture and progress and rational thought, something recognized it. Something was afraid. The signal reached the Crin collective 17 minutes later. In the vast, humming network of Crin consciousness, 17 minutes was both an eternity and less than a heartbeat. Information traveled at the speed of thought, and thought, for the Crin, moved at speeds that individual-minded species could barely conceptualize. So when the border node, a small distributed intelligence stationed at the edge of Crin space, registered the anomalous readings and passed them to the nearest regional mind, the regional mind processed them, cross-referenced them against 600 years of archived data, and experienced something that Crin hadn't felt collectively in a very, very long time. Confusion. Not the gentle confusion of an unsolved equation or an unexpected variable. Not the manageable confusion of encountering a new species or an uncharted phenomenon. Deep, systemic confusion. The kind that came from data that refused to fit any existing model. The border node had detected ships. That part was clear. Ships on a vector that would take them toward the center of known space, toward the heart of galactic civilization. Ships that were large, very large, and moving in a formation that the Crin's military analysis submind recognized as neither random nor defensive. It was offensive. But the part that caused the confusion, the part that the Crin's vast intelligence kept returning to over and over like a tongue probing a broken tooth, was the drive signatures. The ships were not running on any drive technology that existed in the current galaxy. They were not Veil-Theory pulse drives. Not Sorvathi solar sail arrays. Not the hydrogen siphon engines of the Merath Federation or the dark matter converters of the Pellucid Enclave. Not any engine type that the Crin, who had catalogued every known propulsion technology in the galaxy, had ever recorded. Except one. Deep in the Crin's oldest memory banks, so old that most individual Crin consciousnesses never accessed them, so old that they predated the current collective's formation by nearly 2,000 years, there was a record of a drive signature. Recorded 812 years ago. The last time the Crin border had detected human ships. The collective went very, very quiet. And then, in a single simultaneous pulse that every Crin from border to core experienced at exactly the same moment, it said, "Alert. All nodes. Priority, absolute. They are real. They are coming." In the Sorvathi theocracy's grand temple on the world of Kale Sorva Prime, High Priest Merath was delivering the morning prayer to a congregation of 3,000 when his personal communicator, which no one was supposed to contact him on during services, on pain of severe consequences, vibrated against his wrist. He ignored it. It vibrated again. He ignored it again, his voice never wavering, the ancient words of the morning prayer flowing from him with the practiced smoothness of 60 years of daily repetition. It vibrated a third time, and this time it didn't stop. Merath closed his eyes for a moment. Breathe. Finished the verse he was on. Then, with the careful dignity that high rank demanded, he stepped back from the altar, handed his ceremonial torch to his second, and walked to the side chamber. He looked at his communicator. The message was from Grand Admiral Sarath Vel Khan, commander of the Sorvathi Defense Fleet, a woman who had never, in 30 years of military service, sent Merath a message that wasn't carefully worded, formally structured, and thoroughly proofread. This message was 4 words. They found our ships. Merath stared at it. They found our ships. He knew, with the cold certainty of a man who had spent his entire life interpreting divine signals, that this was not a metaphor. This was not code. This was not some administrative crisis dressed up in dramatic language. He knew exactly what it meant. Because 3 weeks ago the Sorvathi had sent 12 unmanned probe ships into the deep outer reach, further than any Sorvathi vessel had ever gone, to investigate a series of anomalous gravity readings that their long-range sensors had been picking up for almost a year. The probes had gone silent 11 days ago. They'd assumed a technical failure. Deep space was unforgiving. Probes failed. But now Grand Admiral Sarath was telling him they'd been found. Not retrieved. Not recovered. Found. Merath sat down on the bench in the side chamber, in his full ceremonial robes, with the sound of 3,000 Sorvathi still praying in the hall beyond, and for the first time in 60 years, the High Priest of the Twin Suns was not sure what to pray for. Across the galaxy the news moved. Not quickly at first. There was no single galactic communication network, no unified alert system, no structure that would allow one piece of information to travel from one edge of known space to the other in minutes. The civilizations of the galaxy were old and proud and had never quite trusted each other enough to build something like that. So the news moved the way all important news moved in the galaxy, through diplomatic channels, through military relays, through the personal communicators of people who knew people who knew people. It moved through whispers at first. Something on the long-range arrays. Something big. Something coming. Then through more urgent messages. Unknown drive signatures. Hundreds of ships. Maybe more. Then through the kind of communications that governments only sent when the situation had moved beyond urgent and into something that didn't have a clean word in most galactic languages. The humans are real. The humans are here. The humans are coming. And in every corner of the galaxy, in every civilization that had ever told the old stories around its equivalent of a fire, the same question rose up like a tide. What do we do? What do you do when the myth arrives? What do you do when the ghost knocks on your door? What do you do when the thing that was supposed to be gone, the thing that was supposed to have been destroyed or died out or simply faded away, comes back? What do you do when 800 years of comfortable absence ends? Nobody had an answer. Not yet. But somewhere in the dark, between the stars, the fleet kept coming. And it was enormous. On the bridge of the VSS Remembrance, the lead vessel of Veiltheri Diplomatic Station KL-9's small defense attachment, Commander Sareth Vel-Doran watched the long-range array update in real time and tried very hard to maintain the calm expression that her rank required. The array had been counting for 47 minutes now. It had not stopped. "Current count?" she asked, her voice steady. Ensign Pavel looked at his display. His hands, she noticed, were not entirely steady. 914 confirmed vessels, Commander. Array is still detecting new signatures at the edge of its range. 914. Sareth had commanded a fleet once. Before the posting at KL-9, before the years of border monitoring that had quietly put her out to pasture, she had commanded a fleet of 22 ships and had felt genuinely powerful. 914. What's the largest vessel we've confirmed? Pavel pulled up the sensor data. That's... He stopped. Rechecked the numbers. Commander, this can't be right. Tell me. The largest vessel we've confirmed is approximately 4 kilometers long. He looked up. That's bigger than anything the Veiltheri Dominion has ever built. That's bigger than anything in the known galaxy. Sareth looked at the screen. At the slowly updating count. At the drive signatures that their computer still couldn't identify because the reference data was 800 years old and nobody had thought to keep it current because nobody had thought there was any reason to. She thought about the stories. The ones she'd heard as a child. The ones that every Veiltheri child heard, delivered with the particular tone that adults used when they wanted to make something sound like a cautionary tale rather than a genuine warning. The humans were dangerous, the stories said. Not because they were strong, though they were. Not because they were numerous, though they were that too. But because of something else. Something harder to define. They were persistent, the stories said. They didn't stop. They didn't quit. They didn't accept defeat as a final state. You could knock them down and they would get up. You could scatter them and they would regroup. You could break them and somehow, inexplicably, they would put themselves back together. And they were angry, the stories said. A slow, deep anger that didn't burn out. A grudge that lasted generations. A memory that didn't fade. Be grateful, the stories always ended. Be grateful they are gone. Sareth looked at the count on the screen. 932. 933. 934. Send a message to the Dominion High Command, she said quietly. Priority Alpha. No encryption delays, raw transmission, fastest channel we have. What's the message, Commander? Sareth took a slow breath. Tell them, she said, that the myths have arrived. To understand why the galaxy reacted the way it did, with that particular mixture of disbelief, terror, and something that a psychologist might have called anticipatory dread, you have to understand what had happened 800 years ago. Or rather what everyone thought had happened. Because the truth, as it turned out, was considerably more complicated than the stories suggested. The history as taught in Veiltheri schools, in Crin data cores, in Sorvathi scripture, and in every other institution of civilized galactic learning went like this. The humans had been a species of remarkable, some said alarming, vitality. They'd emerged from a single wet, warm world at the edge of what was now known as the Outer Reach, a world they called Earth, a name that meant simply soil or ground in their primary language, which the galaxy found both charmingly humble and faintly concerning. They'd developed faster than any species before or since. From their first primitive radio signals to their first faster-than-light jump had taken them less than 4 centuries. A timeline that made every other spacefaring species look at the data, look at each other, and quietly agree that something seemed wrong with the numbers. But the numbers were right. They'd come out into the galaxy hungry and curious and completely, almost offensively, unafraid. They'd made contact with the Veiltheri first. The Veiltheri were the closest spacefaring civilization to Earth, and that first contact had set the tone for everything that followed. The Veiltheri diplomat sent to meet them had prepared a careful speech about the nature of galactic civilization, about the protocols of first contact, about the long and complex history of interstellar relations. It was a speech that the veil theory had used in various forms for 600 years. A reliable speech. A dignified speech. The human delegation, 3 people in environment suits that were clearly jury-rigged from multiple different technologies and held together by what appeared to be a combination of engineering genius and sheer stubbornness, had listened to approximately 40 seconds of this speech before one of them had held up a hand and said, in the veil theory's own language, which the humans had apparently spent 6 months learning from intercepted communications, "Can we skip to the part where we figure out if you're friendly or not? We have a long flight home." The diplomat had been so startled that he'd answered honestly. "We are cautiously optimistic about being friendly," he'd said. "Good enough," the human had replied. "Want to see our ship?" And that, more or less, was how it had gone. The humans had integrated into galactic civilization the way a river integrates into a landscape, not by following the existing channels but by creating new ones. They traded aggressively and negotiated brilliantly. They formed alliances with unlikely partners and made unexpected enemies. They were, depending on who you asked, either the most valuable addition to the galactic community in recorded history or the most disruptive force to emerge since the fracture wars of 2,000 years past. Probably both. They'd also fought. That was the part the history books always got to eventually, with the particular tone that civilized societies used when they had to acknowledge something uncomfortable. The humans had fought and they had been extraordinary at it. Not invincible. Not perfect. They'd lost battles, lost wars, lost entire fleets to superior numbers or superior technology or the simple bad luck that affects every species eventually. But they fought with a quality that other civilizations found deeply, viscerally unsettling. They fought like they didn't know how to stop. The Crin had a concept for it, buried deep in their oldest data. Momentum. The idea that a body in motion tends to stay in motion, and that the only way to stop it is to apply equal and opposite force. The humans, the Crin noted with the clinical detachment of a species that didn't feel fear the way individuals did, applied momentum to war with an instinctive precision that suggested it was somehow built into their biology. You hit them, they hit back harder. You pushed them back, they reorganized and pushed forward. You took something from them, a world, a fleet, a resource, a person, and they came back for it. Not immediately necessarily. Sometimes years later. Sometimes generations later. But they came back. Always. The Sorvathi had learned this the hard way in the war of 300 years before the Silence. A war that the Sorvathi still called the Kailmara, the Great Correction, and the humans had called, with their characteristic lack of ceremony, the Payback. The Sorvathi had been winning, by most measurable standards, for the first 6 years of the conflict. They had more ships, better positioned, and they had pushed the human frontier back by nearly 40 light-years. And then something had changed. The humans hadn't retreated further. They hadn't sued for peace. They hadn't done any of the things that a rational, outmatched opponent would do. Instead, they had gone quiet for 8 months, a silence that the Sorvathi had interpreted as preparation for surrender, and then they had appeared at 4 different Sorvathi systems simultaneously, with a fleet that was twice the size of what their intelligence said the humans could field, running on drive technology that their intelligence said the humans hadn't yet developed, and they had taken all 4 systems in 72 hours. The Sorvathi peace envoy had arrived at the human negotiating table 2 weeks later. The terms they received were not the terms of a species that had been losing a war for 6 years. After that, most of the galaxy had been much more careful about starting things with humans. But then, 200 years after the Kailmara, something had happened. The Silence had begun. It hadn't been dramatic, the history books agreed. There was no single moment, no grand event, no battle or disaster that anyone could point to and say, that's when it ended. It had been gradual. A slowing of human communications. A reduction in trade. Ships that stopped coming. Ambassadors that weren't replaced when they retired. The galactic community had noticed and had done what the galactic community usually did with things that made it vaguely uncomfortable. It had waited to see what happened next. What happened next, over the following 40 years, was a lot of nothing. The humans retreated, it couldn't be called anything else, from the galactic stage. Their worlds went quiet. Their ships disappeared from the trade lanes. Their ambassadors went home. And then their communications stopped entirely. Various explanations were offered. Civil war. Plague. Internal collapse. The Sorvathi, with a spite that even the most diplomatic Sorvathi could not entirely conceal, suggested that the humans had simply burned themselves out, that their aggressive, unsustainable rate of growth and development and conflict had finally caught up with them, that they had consumed themselves from the inside. Expeditions were sent, eventually, to human space. The first 3 found nothing. Not ruins, not wreckage, not bodies. Just empty systems, empty stations, empty ships drifting in orbits that no one had maintained in years. As if everyone had simply left. The fourth expedition found Earth. Or rather, it found where Earth had been. The planet was still there. It was just different. Scorched in ways that atmospheric analysis couldn't fully explain. The surface temperature wrong. The electromagnetic profile of the system altered in ways that suggested something extraordinary had happened. Something involving energies that the expedition scientists couldn't identify. The expedition sent its report back to Galactic civilization. The Galactic civilization read it, discussed it, argued about it for decades, and eventually settled on a conclusion. The humans were gone. Whatever had happened, war, catastrophe, something they'd done to themselves or something that had been done to them, it was over. The most disruptive, most vital, most alarming species the galaxy had ever produced had ended. The galaxy breathed out. And over the following centuries the humans became myth. Their technology was studied and catalogued. Their worlds, gradually, were colonized by other species. Their trade routes were absorbed into other networks. Their history became legend, and their legends became stories, and their stories became the kind of thing you told children when you wanted them to understand why the galaxy had taken so long to become civilized. Be grateful, the stories said. Be grateful they are gone. But they weren't. They were just quiet. And quiet, as any human could have told you, was not the same as gone. Rear Admiral Chin stood at the command console of the HSS Unbroken and looked at the navigation display with the particular expression of someone who has spent a very long time preparing for a moment and is now, finally, in it. She was 53 years old, with the kind of face that had been described, by people who knew her, as built for weather. Dark eyes, lines around the mouth that suggested more frowning than smiling, close-cropped gray hair that she'd stopped thinking about somewhere around her 40th birthday. She wore the uniform of the human Space Force, a dark blue with silver trim that hadn't changed significantly in design in 400 years, because humans, whatever else they were, understood the value of continuity. Around her, the bridge of the Unbroken hummed with activity. 47 crew members occupied 47 stations, and every one of them was doing exactly what they were supposed to be doing, with exactly the quiet efficiency that years of training produced, and not a single one of them was saying what every single one of them was thinking. We're actually doing it. After 800 years we're actually going back. Navigation confirms we're on approach vector, said Lieutenant Commander Yusuf Adeyemi from the navigation console, his voice carefully neutral. At current speed, we'll reach the edge of what used to be Veil-Theory sensor range in approximately 6 hours. Current sensor range, Chinwei corrected without looking up. Current sensor range, Adeyemi agreed. Right. Because that was the thing, they didn't know exactly what the galaxy looked like now. They had data, of course. 800 years wasn't complete radio silence. Signals traveled at the speed of light, and signals from a civilization that had been expanding and transmitting for 4,000 years took a very long time to stop reaching you, even if the civilization itself went quiet. They'd been listening the whole time. They knew, broadly, that the Veil-Theory Dominion still existed and had expanded. They knew the Crin were still operating and had, if anything, gotten larger. They knew the Sorvathi theocracy had survived the Kael'mara and the centuries since, and had rebuilt into something that looked, from the outside, considerably more militarized than it had been. What they didn't know was the exact disposition of fleets, the current state of technology, the precise political relationships, and 1,000 other details that made the difference between walking into a room and walking into an ambush. They were about to find out. How's the fleet? Chinwei asked. All 1,112 vessels accounted for and on station, said Commander Marcus Reed from the tactical console. Jump drives nominal. Weapons systems at standby. All hands at general quarters. 1,112 ships. Not the largest fleet the humans had ever fielded. Not by a long shot. But it was the fleet they had, and it was considerably larger than anything they'd had when they'd gone quiet 800 years ago. 800 years was a long time. A lot could change in 800 years. A lot had. Admiral. The voice came from Chinwei's right, Captain Sarah Okafor, the Unbroken's commanding officer, a tall woman with the kind of calm that came from having done very frightening things so many times that frightening things had lost their power to frighten. We're getting pings off our forward sensors. Looks like someone at the edge of the system noticed us. Veil-Theory? Drive signature matches Veil-Theory diplomatic station configuration. Okafor paused. A small station. Nothing that could threaten us. Chinwei thought about that. A diplomatic station. She thought about what it would mean to be on that station right now, to be looking at long-range sensors and seeing 1,000 ships coming out of the dark. Are they transmitting? Not yet. They're probably still counting. Chinwei almost smiled. Let them count. We'll make contact when we're ready. She turned back to the navigation display. To the stars ahead of her. To the galaxy that had written them off, moved on, built over their empty worlds and absorbed their trade routes and turned their history into myth. She thought about 800 years. She thought about what the humans had done with 800 years. And she thought about what the galaxy was about to learn. Admiral? Adeyemi said quietly, so quietly that only she could hear. How do you think they'll react? Chenwei considered the question seriously, the way she considered all serious questions. Probably terrified, she said. And probably angry. Should we be worried about that? Yusuf. She finally looked up, and there was something in her eyes. Not quite amusement, not quite steel, but something that lived in the neighborhood of both. We are humans. We invented worried about that. We're going to be fine. She looked back at the stars. Absymjhy no more hiding, she said quietly to no one in particular, in a mix of English and Urdu that she'd grown up with, that her grandmother had spoken, that had survived 800 years of isolation because language, like stubbornness, was one of those things humans kept. No more silence. No more myths. She squared her shoulders. Sound battle stations. Not hot. We're not looking for a fight. But let's look like we're ready for one. Aye, Admiral. And someone get me a communications officer who can speak Veiltheri. We're going to need to have a conversation. The message came through on a frequency that hadn't been used in 800 years. Ensign Pavel was the one who caught it, which was appropriate given that he'd been the one to first detect the fleet. He'd been on his 4th consecutive hour at the communications console, refusing to be relieved despite the regulations that required rotation every 2 hours, because he had the particular inability to leave a situation unresolved that marks certain personalities regardless of species. He almost missed it. The frequency was so old, so far outside the range of anything Veiltheri systems routinely monitored, that it barely registered as a signal at all. Just a faint pulse at the edge of the spectrum, like a heartbeat heard through 6 feet of stone. But he caught it. Commander. His voice came out steadier than he felt, which surprised him. We have a transmission. Sareth was at his side in 4 steps. From the fleet. Yes. He paused. They're using old protocols. Very old. The translation matrix is having trouble. The language encoding is from 8 centuries ago. But I think I can. He adjusted several settings with the quick precision of someone who had spent years tinkering with systems that weren't supposed to work together. There. The voice that came through the speakers was human. Neither of them had ever heard a human voice before. Not a real one. They'd heard recordings. The Veiltheri Dominion maintained archives of human communications from the contact era, but recordings were recordings. They were historical artifacts like documents or photographs. This was different. This was a voice in the present tense. It was a woman's voice. Measured, calm, with a quality that Saretha's brain, reaching for a reference it didn't quite have, eventually decided to describe as unhurried. Not slow. Not drawling. Just unhurried. Like someone who had plenty of time and knew it. The translation came through imperfectly. 800 years of linguistic drift on both sides had left gaps, but the meaning was clear enough. This is Rear Admiral Chen Wei, commanding officer of the Human Space Force First Return Fleet, aboard the HSS Unbroken. We are approaching on a diplomatic heading. We are not hostile. We request a channel for direct communication with whoever is in command of this station. We understand this may come as a surprise. Pause. And then, so quietly that Pavel almost missed it. We have a great deal to discuss. Sareth had been trained, all Veiltheri officers of her rank were trained, in crisis response protocol. She had spent 3 weeks in a simulation chamber learning how to respond to every conceivable emergency without losing composure. Hostile incursion, civilian evacuation, system failure, first contact with unknown species, political crisis. First contact with a species that was supposed to be extinct. That had not been in the curriculum. She did what she'd been trained to do in situations not covered by training. She improvised carefully. Open a channel, she said. Pavel looked at her. He was young enough that he hadn't yet learned to keep all his feelings off his face, and his face was currently expressing a complex mixture of excitement and the particular brand of terror that comes from being in a moment that will be talked about for the rest of your life. Open the channel, Sareth said again more gently. He opened it. She sat down, not because she needed to but because standing felt somehow wrong for this. She was about to talk to something that her civilization had spent 800 years trying to file into the comfortable category of history. She felt, obscurely, that she should be at the same level. She cleared her throat, activated the translator, spoke in Veiltheri, trusting the system to convert it. "This is Commander Sareth Vel-Doran, Commanding Officer of Veiltheri Diplomatic Station Kale 9. Admiral Wei, I have received your transmission." She paused. "I am glad to hear you describe your approach as diplomatic." There was a delay, lightspeed travel time across the distance between them, plus processing, and then the calm, unhurried voice again. "Commander Vel-Doran, thank you for responding. I want to be clear. We have no hostile intent toward the Veiltheri Dominion or any member of the galactic community. We are returning to resume our place in galactic society, and we are aware that our extended absence may have caused some confusion." Confusion, Sarah thought. That's one word for it. "Admiral," she said carefully, "you must understand that the galaxy has, in your absence." She stopped. Tried again. "You are believed to be gone. Most civilizations believe the human species is extinct." Another delay. "Yes," the Admiral said. "We know. Then you understand the magnitude of what is happening right now." "We do, Commander." And something shifted in the voice, just slightly, just enough to notice. Something that wasn't quite warmth and wasn't quite steel but was somewhere between the two. "That's why we came back in force. We wanted to make sure that whatever conversation happened next, it happened on our terms." Sareth sat very still. Whatever conversation happened next, it happened on our terms. She thought about that. She thought about 900, no, the count was at over 1,000 now, ships behind that voice. She thought about the 4-kilometer vessel that their sensors said was leading the fleet. She thought about 800 years of absence and whatever the humans had been doing with all that time. "I see," she said. "We'd like to request a meeting," Admiral Wei said. "At your station if possible. Or at a location of your choosing. We're not fussy about the venue." Another pause, and was that humor in her voice? "We've been patient for 800 years. We can wait a little longer for the details." The message was relayed to Veiltheri High Command in 3 minutes flat. Sareth had never sent a priority alpha communication before. She'd never expected to. The protocol was clear. Priority alpha meant the message went directly to the High Chancellor's personal communications terminal, bypassing every intermediary in the chain. The reply came back in 40 minutes, which was, considering the distance involved and the magnitude of what she'd sent, remarkably fast. It was from the High Chancellor herself. Not a delegate, not an aide, the Chancellor personally. "Confirmed. Maintain communication. Do not take any action that could be construed as hostile. Under no circumstances allow the fleet to proceed toward the inner systems without diplomatic clearance. Arrange meeting at your discretion. Veiltheri diplomatic team will arrive at Kale 9 within 36 hours. Also, Commander Vel-Doran, this message is classified at the highest level. Nothing leaves Kale 9 without my direct authorization. One more thing. The Crin are reporting the same contacts. The Sorvathi are also responding. This is not going to stay contained. Good luck." Sareth read the message twice. Then she folded her hands on the console and breathed for a moment. Then she called Pavel over. "Ensign," she said. "Yes, Commander? How are you at cooking?" He blinked. Passable, Commander." "Why?" "Because in about 12 hours we are going to have humans on this station." She looked at the communications panel, at the open channel, at the faint carrier signal that connected her to the most significant moment in 800 years of galactic history. "And I have no idea what they eat, but I am absolutely certain that showing up without food would be rude. Find out what they eat. Make something." Pavel stared at her. "Commander, there are 900 and over 1,000 human ships approaching, and you're thinking about food?" Sareth looked at him with the patient expression of someone who had learned, in 3 years of diplomatic postings, that the details were always where the real work happened. "I'm thinking about everything, Ensign. But the fleet is going to do what the fleet is going to do regardless of what I think about it. The food I can actually affect." She turned back to the channel. "Now go find out what humans eat. And be subtle about it," asked the Admiral directly. "If they're anything like the old stories say, they'll appreciate the directness." Pavel paused, then said, "And what if they ask us what we eat, Commander?" Sareth smiled, just slightly for just a moment. "Then tell them the truth," she said. "Diplomacy runs on honesty. Eventually." On the bridge of the Unbroken, Rear Admiral Chen Wei closed the communications channel with Station Kale 9 and sat for a moment in the quiet of her own thoughts. "Well?" Captain Okafor asked. "She seems smart, Chinwei said. And scared. In that order, which is a good order. She looked at the tactical display, at the position of the fleet, at the slowly resolving details of the station ahead. She's also bought us time. The Veiltheri High Command is going to want a meeting. That's what we want. That's what we want, Chinwei agreed. But let's be clear about something because I want everyone on this bridge to understand it before we proceed. She raised her voice slightly, not to a shout but to the particular carrying register that command training gave you. We are not going into this meeting with our hats in our hands. We are not here to apologize for our absence, to explain ourselves, or to ask permission to exist. We are here to inform the galaxy that we are back, that we are capable, and that we expect to resume our place in galactic society with the full rights and standing that we had 800 years ago. Silence on the bridge. Is that understood? Aye, Admiral, 47 voices said in the particular tone that meant they'd been thinking the same thing and were glad someone had said it. Good. Chinwei turned back to the navigation display. Now, someone tell me what the political situation is between the Veiltheri and the Crin, because when I last checked, they were about 7 years away from a war, and 800 years is a long time for a disagreement to either resolve or fester. Lieutenant Commander Adeyemi pulled up his records. Admiral, based on our intelligence intercepts over the past 100 years. Give me the 30-second version. Tense but stable. The Crin expanded into 3 systems that the Veiltheri consider within their sphere of influence during the late 4th century of our absence. The resulting cold conflict never went hot, but it's never fully resolved either. They're cooperating superficially through the Galactic Council, but there's significant mistrust. The Sorvathi? Still hold a grudge. From the Kael'Mara and possibly from several smaller conflicts in the interim. Their military has grown substantially. Chinwei nodded slowly. So we're walking into a galaxy that's been playing a careful, cold game for 800 years, and we're about to shake the board. That's an accurate summary, Admiral. She was quiet for a moment. Good, she said again. A stable board favors the pieces that are already on it. We need the board shaken. She looked out at the stars. At the galaxy that had written them off. At the 800 years of careful, cold, comfortable assumption that was about to end. Caro, she said softly to herself, in the old mixed tongue that had survived because language survived. Caro, do it, make it happen, move. A word that belonged to a dozen different Earth languages at once and had evolved, in the 8 centuries of isolation, into something specifically, distinctly human. She straightened in her chair. Bring us in, she said. Veiltheri Diplomatic Station Kale 9 was not, by anyone's honest assessment, an impressive facility. It had been designed for function, not grandeur. A hub of administrative and monitoring work at the edge of Veiltheri space, staffed by career soldiers who had, for various reasons, found themselves at a posting that was widely understood to be the galactic equivalent of a very comfortable exile. Its corridors were clean and its systems were functional and its view of the stars was genuinely beautiful, but it had none of the sweeping architecture or ceremonial elegance that Veiltheri high culture valued. Commander Sareth Vel Duran had been apologetic about this, in a careful, diplomatic way, when she'd communicated the meeting arrangements to Admiral Wei. Admiral Wei had said, "A table and chairs is all we need." Which was, Sareth reflected as she waited in the station's largest conference room, which was also not impressive, seating perhaps 20 people around an oval table with a view of space through one wall of transparent aluminum, exactly the kind of thing the old stories said humans would say. The shuttle from the Unbroken had docked 11 minutes ago. She could hear, distantly, the sound of footsteps in the corridor. She was aware of her own heartbeat in a way that she was not usually aware of it. She was about to meet a human. No living Veiltheri had done that. The door opened. Admiral Chinwei walked in with 4 people behind her, and Sareth Vel Duran's first thought, quickly suppressed, then carefully filed away to be examined later in private, was that the stories had gotten some things right and some things completely, magnificently wrong. Right, humans were approximately the size of Veiltheri, give or take. Bipedal. Bilateral symmetry. 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 head. In the broad biological category of things that walked upright and used tools, they were recognizable. Wrong, everything else. They were softer than the stories suggested in some ways. More varied. The 5 humans who had just walked into her conference room were 5 entirely different colors, sizes, and configurations of human, ranging from the Admiral, shorter than Sareth had expected, wire-thin, with close-cropped gray hair and dark eyes that moved constantly, cataloging, assessing, to the man behind her left shoulder who was tall enough to make even Sareth feel modest, with shoulders that suggested a level of physical mass that seemed almost architectural. They were also somehow more present than she'd anticipated. It was hard to articulate exactly what she meant by that, even internally. They simply occupied the room differently than Veil Theory did. As if the space they took up extended slightly beyond their physical bodies. As if being in a room with them changed the temperature of the air. Admiral Wei saw her looking, and something moved across her face, a micro-expression gone before Sareth could fully read it, and then she crossed the room and held out her right hand. Sareth knew what that meant. She'd done her research. She took the hand and shook it, careful about pressure. Veil Theory grip strength was different from human, and felt the Admiral's grip adjust to match her, easily and without making a production of it. "Commander Veldoran," Chinwei said. "Thank you for receiving us." "Thank you for the warning," Sareth said, and meant it. The Admiral's mouth curved. The human gesture for amusement she remembered, or at least one of the human gestures for amusement. There were apparently many. "We debated about whether to announce ourselves or just show up. I argued for the warning. Some of my colleagues thought the shock might be useful." "It still was," Sareth said honestly. Chinwei made the curve of mouth again, and this time it reached her eyes. They sat down on opposite sides of the table, the Admiral and her four-person team on one side, Sareth and Pavail, who was trying very hard not to stare, and two senior staff officers on the other. And then, for approximately 3 seconds, both sides simply looked at each other. Sareth thought, they are real. They are actually genuinely physically real. Across the table, she was not wrong in her assessment that Chinwei was thinking something similar. Chinwei was thinking, Veil Theory. In person. After all this time. Look at their eyes. Then both of them, within a second of each other, drew breath to speak. And both of them, within half a second of that, stopped and waited for the other. And then the tall man behind Chinwei's left shoulder, the large one, whose name turned out to be Major Daniel Osei, head of the Admiral's security detail, made a sound that might, in other circumstances, have been mistaken for a cough, and which was very clearly a suppressed laugh. Chinwei and Sareth looked at each other. And then, slightly to both of their surprise, both of them laughed. It broke the ice in a way that no amount of carefully prepared diplomatic language could have managed. Not a big laugh. A brief, genuine moment of shared acknowledgement that this situation was extraordinary and slightly absurd, and they were both going to have to navigate it without any real precedent to fall back on. "All right," Chinwei said when the moment passed. "I'll go first. We're back. We've been elsewhere. We're aware that significant time has passed and that the galaxy has changed, and we are prepared to adapt. We are not prepared to be treated as a lesser civilization or to accept any diminishment of human sovereign rights in the systems we originally settled. Those are our non-negotiables going in." She paused. "Everything else we can talk about." Sareth considered this. "That's quite a direct opening. We're quite a direct people." "Yes." Sareth looked at the human delegation. At their carefully neutral faces, all of them watching her with that same cataloging attentiveness. "The Veil Theory Dominion does not oppose human sovereignty in human systems, Admiral. We never did. Our concern, historically, was with human expansion patterns and certain aggressive foreign policy choices. We're aware of the concerns," Chinwei said. "We'd like the opportunity to address them. But that's a longer conversation than this meeting can accommodate. What I'd like to do today is establish the basics, confirm that we're not here as a hostile force, establish a channel for ongoing communication, and begin the process of notifying the broader galactic community." "The broader galactic community," Sareth said carefully, "is already aware of your arrival. The Crin have confirmed your fleet's approach. The Sorvathi have been notified. The Galactic Council has been alerted." She paused. "There is quite a significant amount of discussion occurring." "Discussion," Chinwei said. "Very loud discussion," Sareth said. "In several cases." Chinwei nodded slowly. "We expected that. Admiral." Sareth leaned forward slightly, not aggressively, just enough to indicate sincerity. "There are people in this galaxy who are afraid. Not just surprised, genuinely afraid. The stories that have been told about humans for 800 years are not uniformly flattering. Some civilizations built significant military infrastructure around the assumption that the threat you represented was gone. We know about the military infrastructure," Chinwei said. Her voice was still calm, but there was something underneath it, a flatness, a precision that hadn't been there when they were laughing. "Then you know that some of those civilizations may perceive your arrival as a threat," Chinwei said. "Yes, Commander. We know." She looked at the view of space through the transparent wall, at the stars, at the distant pinpoints of light that were human ships. "Tell me something honestly. When your long-range array first picked us up, When Ensign Pavale was sitting at his console and watching that count go up, what was your first thought? Sareth considered the question. She could give a diplomatic answer. She was very good at diplomatic answers. She chose on instinct not to. My first thought, she said, was, they're back and we have no idea what they want, and that is terrifying. She paused. My second thought was, they warned us. They used a diplomatic frequency. They asked for a meeting rather than simply arriving. She looked at the Admiral. My second thought was considerably more comfortable than my first. Chin-Wei looked at her for a long moment. Good, she said. Hold on to your second thought. It's the right one. She straightened in her chair. We are not here to conquer anything. We're not here to reclaim anything that was colonized in our absence by force. We're here to talk. We're here to resume our place at the table. She glanced briefly at the table between them. Preferably a larger table. Sareth almost smiled. That can be arranged. One more thing, Chin-Wei said. And I want you to relay this exactly to your high command because it matters. We know about the Sorvathi. Sareth went very still. What do you mean? 12 unmanned Sorvathi probe ships entered what we consider human space approximately 3 weeks ago. The Admiral's voice was steady, factual, without inflection. We retrieved them. We reviewed their data. We understand what they were looking for. Pause. We've returned the probes. Intact. Unopened as far as the Sorvathi crews will be able to determine. Another pause. We wanted the Sorvathi to know that we can. We also wanted them to know that we chose not to. That distinction is important. Sareth stared at her. We retrieved them. We reviewed their data. Meaning, the humans had been in the vicinity long enough and had technology sufficient enough to intercept 12 Sorvathi probe ships in deep space, review their data and then return them, without the Sorvathi knowing. Without anyone knowing until now. HFY, Sareth thought, in the human phrase she'd been studying from old translation databases, preparing for this meeting. No more hiding. The phrase didn't translate perfectly into veil theory, it had a weight to it, a dual meaning that was specifically human, but she understood it now, she thought. In her bones. In the particular cold clarity that comes with realizing that something you thought you understood has just revealed a new and unexpected depth. No more hiding. They hadn't been gone. They'd been watching. I will relay that, she said carefully. Exactly. Chin-Wei nodded. Thank you, Commander. She looked around the conference room, at the clean, functional walls, the ordinary table, the stars beyond the transparent aluminum. Your ensign sent us a message earlier asking what we eat. That was kind. Sareth glanced at Pavale, who was turning an interesting color. We wanted to be hospitable. We appreciate it. The Admiral stood, her team stood with her, perfectly synchronized without any visible signal passing between them. We brought our own food as it happens. Old habit. That curve of the mouth again. But we'd be happy to share if you have time. Some of the best diplomatic conversations I've ever had happened over a meal. She held out her hand again. Sareth took it. Some of the best diplomatic conversations I've ever had, she said honestly, happened in the last 40 minutes. Chin-Wei laughed, a real laugh this time, short and genuine. We're going to be fine, she said. The galaxy doesn't know it yet, but we're going to be fine. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was, by any historical standard, a disaster. Not a violent disaster. Not a shooting disaster. But the kind of disaster that happens when you put representatives of 6 major galactic civilizations in a room together, give them an agenda that consists entirely of, discuss the unexpected return of a species everyone thought was extinct, and expect them to behave with the measured dignity of experienced interstellar diplomats. They tried. They genuinely tried. The Council had been built on the principle of measured dignity, its very architecture, the circular chamber, the equal height seats, the neutral lighting that cast no civilization's representatives in shadow, was designed to enforce a baseline of civilized behavior. It lasted approximately 11 minutes. The Sorvathi representative, Elder Counselor Vareth Vel-San, a woman of considerable age and considerably more considerable temper, broke first. This is not a discussion, she said, cutting off the Merath representative's carefully hedged opening remarks. This is a catastrophe. The most dangerous species in the history of the known galaxy has reappeared with a fleet of over 1,000 warships, and the Veil Theory response has been to invite them for a meal. The conversation at Station Kale 9 was diplomatic in nature. The Veil Theory representative, a young diplomat named Sorrel who had been given this assignment 3 hours ago and was visibly regretting it, said carefully. Commander Veldoran's assessment is that the humans are approaching in good faith. Commander Veldoran's assessment, Vareth said, with a particular tone that civilized people use when they want to imply that someone is catastrophically wrong without technically saying so, is the assessment of a border station commander with no prior experience of human contact who met them for 40 minutes and was charmed. "The Admiral returned our probes," said another voice. This one was quieter, and it came from the Sorvathi High Command liaison seated 2 seats down from Vareth, a younger man, Admiral Sorath Velkan, the same admiral who had sent High Priest Mayrath that forward message. He was looking at his hands. Intact. Uncompromised. After reviewing the data. "That's a threat," Vareth said. "That's a demonstration of capability disguised as a gesture of goodwill." "Elder Counselor," Velkan said, still looking at his hands, "it's both. And that's rather the point, isn't it?" He looked up. "They could have kept the probes. They could have destroyed them. They chose to return them. That's a message. We can and we chose not to. The question isn't whether that's a threat. Of course it's a threat, everything they're doing is a calculated message. The question is what message they want us to take from it." "Superiority," Vareth said. "They want us to know they're superior." Or, Velkan said, "They want us to know that they have the capacity for restraint. That they understand the value of de-escalation." He paused. "Which would be a change from historical precedent." This observation landed in the chamber like a stone in still water. The Crin representative was not, technically, a single person. The collective's presence at the Galactic Council was managed through a specially designed interface, a node that allowed the distributed intelligence to participate as a unified voice. The node was housed in a sleek column of dark material at one of the council seats, and it spoke in a voice that was carefully modulated to be neither unsettling nor dismissive. It had been quiet since the session opened. It spoke now. "We have analyzed all available data on the returning fleet," the Crin said. "We have compared drive signatures, hull configurations, weapons profiles where detectable, and approach vectors against historical human Space Force records from 812 years ago." Every head in the chamber turned toward the column. "Our analysis concludes, with a confidence level of 97.3%, that the fleet is what it claims to be, human. This is not an impersonation by another party. These are humans. Their technology is substantially more advanced than our 800-year-old reference data would suggest, which indicates significant development during their absence." Pause. "Specifically, their drive technology is approximately 4 to 6 generations ahead of what our models would have predicted based on their pre-absence trajectory. That means they've been developing," the Veil Theory representative said slowly. "Wherever they went, whatever they were doing. They were building," Velkan said. Silence. "Caro," the Crin said, and several representatives looked up sharply because the Crin had just used a human word, an old human word, one that appeared in the archives, and they said it with the flat, precise delivery of the collective making a formal statement. "It is an old human word. It means begin. Do the thing. Our archives indicate it was a common expression among their military and engineering communities." Another pause. "We find it relevant." "Relevant how?" the Mayrath representative asked. "Because it captures what the humans appear to have done with 800 years, the Crin said. "They began. They built. They developed. And now they are moving." The column was quiet for a moment. "We should be precise about what this means. The human fleet is significantly capable. Our projections suggest that in a direct engagement without foreknowledge of their weapon systems, a defending force would require numerical superiority of at least 4 to 1, possibly higher, to achieve a decisive outcome." The chamber went very quiet. 4 to 1, Elder Counselor Vareth said. "Minimum," the Crin said. "Possibly higher. We do not have full data on their weapons systems." Vareth looked around the chamber. At the representatives of 6 civilizations, all doing rapid private calculations about the scale of what 4 to 1 superiority meant in practical terms. "And the Galactic Council," she said, "in a combined effort, including every ship currently under arms for every member civilization, would achieve approximately 2.5 to 1 numerical superiority," the Crin said. "Which, given the technology gap, we assess as insufficient." The chamber was very, very quiet. "So you're saying," the Veil Theory representative said carefully, "that the Galactic Council in a combined military effort could not defeat the human fleet." "We are saying," the Crin said, "that the probability of victory in a direct engagement is low. We estimate 23%, with significant variance depending on unknown variables." "And the humans know this," Velkan said. It wasn't a question. Correct, the Crin said. The positioning of the fleet, the approach vector, the timing of first contact, all of it indicates careful planning by individuals who have thought deeply about galactic power dynamics and have arranged this return to maximize their negotiating position. Which brings us, the Veil-Theory diplomat said, with the exhausted tone of someone who is arriving at a conclusion they don't like, back to, what do they want? The answer came not from the council chamber but from a second message, transmitted from the Unbroken to the Galactic Council's public communications channel, the one that all major civilizations monitored, the one that was used for broad announcements rather than direct diplomatic communication. It was addressed to the galactic community as a whole. It was 3 minutes long. Admiral Chen Wei delivered it herself on camera. They could all see her, standing in what appeared to be the bridge of her ship, looking directly at the recording device with her steady, cataloging eyes. She spoke in Standard Galactic, the lingua franca that had evolved over 4,000 years of interstellar contact, a language that the humans had helped shape in the original contact era and which had changed enough in 800 years that she spoke it with a slight, careful formality, like someone using a language they had learned from books rather than from childhood. This message is for the galactic community. My name is Rear Admiral Chen Wei of the Human Space Force. 800 years ago, the human species withdrew from the galactic stage. We did not explain our reasons at the time. I am here to offer that explanation now and to announce our return. I will not use this message to discuss why we left. That is a conversation for another time in a proper venue with the right people present. What I will say is this: we did not leave because we were defeated. We did not leave because we were dying. We left by choice and we have returned by choice. We are aware that our absence has been long, that in the interim our history has been reinterpreted and our legacy has been, in many cases, distorted. We are also aware that some of the systems we originally settled have been colonized by other species during our absence. We do not intend to address those situations with force. We intend to address them through negotiation, through the Galactic Council's established dispute resolution protocols, and through the kind of patient, measured diplomacy that the 800 years of quiet have apparently convinced the galaxy we are incapable of. We are capable of it. We are also capable of what the galaxy already knows we are capable of. We have no intention of pretending otherwise. What we are asking, what we are telling the galactic community, is that both things are true simultaneously. We are here in strength and we want peace. We are prepared to fight and we prefer to talk. We will be establishing diplomatic contact with each major civilization individually over the coming weeks. We will be requesting emergency sessions with the Galactic Council to address outstanding territorial and political questions. We will be open and we will be direct and we will be patient. But we will also be watching. That is all. The recording ended. In the Galactic Council chamber, 6 civilizations representatives sat in silence. Then the Merath representative, a quiet, thoughtful woman named Dila, who had said very little during the whole session, said. She said, "We will be watching." "Yes," Velcon said. In the present tense. "Yes." Dila looked at the blank screen. "They've been watching all along," she said. "Haven't they?" Nobody answered. Because nobody needed to. The hardest conversation Chen Wei had to prepare for was not with the Veil-Theory, or the Crin, or even the Sorvathi. It was with her own people. Specifically, it was with the 17-member Civilian Oversight Board of the Human Return Mission, a body that had been established 200 years ago, when the decision to eventually return to the galaxy had first been formally approved by the human government in exile. The board represented the full spectrum of human opinion on the return, from the enthusiastically aggressive to the deeply cautious, and their authority over the mission's parameters was both real and significant. Chen Wei met with them on the second day after the KL-9 meeting, in the Unbroken's main conference room, with the fleet visible through the windows as a reminder of what was at stake and what they had. The board chair was a man named David Park, 70 years old, a historian by training and a politician by necessity, with the particular quality of someone who had spent decades thinking about a problem and had arrived at a position that was deeply uncertain. "Admiral," he said when the pleasantries were done, "give us your honest assessment. Not the official one. The honest one." Chen Wei looked at him. At the board. At 17 human faces, some of them people she'd known for 20 years, some of them people she'd met only in the context of this mission, all of them carrying the same weight that she carried and that everyone on every one of those ships carried. The weight of 800 years. "They're scared," she said. "The Veil-Theory, the Crin, the Sorvathi, all of them. Genuinely scared. Not performing fear, not posturing. Actually afraid." She paused. "And they're angry. Some of them. The Sorvathi especially. They thought we were gone, and a world without humans was a world that was easier to understand. We complicated things when we existed. We complicate things again by coming back. Do they have the capability to threaten us? A board member, Colonel, retired, Amelia Singh, the most aggressive voice on the board, asked. Not in a direct engagement. Not with their current disposition. The Crin's analysis of our fleet would be something like ours. They can't win a fight. They know it and we know it. Chinwei looked at Colonel Singh steadily. That is not, Colonel, an invitation to be arrogant about it. Singh held her look. I didn't suggest it was. I know. I'm saying it for the room. She looked around the table. Our position is strong right now. Militarily, diplomatically, we came back at the right time, the right way, with the right numbers. But strength that gets used carelessly stops being an advantage. Every civilization in that galaxy is watching everything we do right now, cataloging it, analyzing it, deciding what kind of humans we are. She paused. What kind of humans are we going to be? Silence. That's the question, she said. That's the one that matters. Not whether we can win a fight. We can. Not whether we have the right to be here. We do. The question is, what do we want from this? What does the return mean? Are we here to reclaim what was ours and punish whoever took it? Are we here to start over, pretend the 800 years didn't happen? Or are we here to do the hard, slow, complicated work of actually belonging to this galaxy again? With respect, Admiral, a younger board member said, researcher Dr. Kira Tanaka, whose specialty was interspecies diplomacy, those aren't mutually exclusive. Some of our systems were colonized. Some of our history was erased. Some of what was done in the 800-year gap was done with the specific knowledge that we were gone and couldn't object. Those are real grievances. They are, Chinwei agreed. And we will address them. But there's a difference between seeking justice and seeking revenge, and the galaxy is going to be watching very carefully to see which one it is. David Park had been quiet for most of this. Now he spoke. Admiral, tell me about the Sorvathi. What specifically? What do they want? Not what they're saying. What do they want? Chinwei thought about this seriously. I think they want us to not exist, she said. I don't mean that as a condemnation. I mean it as an observation. The Sorvathi built an entire civilization that placed itself at the center of the galaxy's moral and political order. Our existence complicates that. We've always complicated that. And 800 years of our absence let them move closer to the center they wanted. She looked at Park. They're not going to start a war with us. They're smarter than that. But they're going to work very hard, through every diplomatic channel available, to limit us, to contain us, to ensure that whatever place we take in the galaxy is a smaller place than the one we left. And our response to that is? To be very, very good at diplomacy. Chinwei smiled slightly, a rare expression and one that her board took note of. Which is something the old stories about humans don't give us a lot of credit for. People remember the wars. People remember the fleet at the Kael'Mara. They forget that before the fleet arrived, we tried the negotiating table 3 times. She looked at the room. We know how to build things. We know how to fight. We are also, when we choose to be, very good at talking. And this time we're going to choose to be. Park nodded slowly. And the humans back home? The ones who've been waiting 800 years for this? Some of them are going to want blood, Admiral. Some of them are going to want to come out here and burn every system that was colonized during our absence and put everyone responsible in front of a tribunal. I know, Chinwei said quietly. How do we manage that? She looked at the window. At the ships. At the stars. We give them something better to want, she said. We give them a future. We show them that the return succeeded, not just militarily, not just that we showed up and no one shot at us, but that we actually have a place in the galaxy again. That the 800 years built something, not just preserved something. She paused. That's the mission. Not the fleet. Not the negotiations. The mission is to show our own people that coming back was worth it. The room was quiet. Then Dr. Tanaka said quietly, and is it? Worth it? Chinwei looked at her. The youngest member of the board. Someone who had been born in the hidden world, who had grown up hearing the stories of the galaxy the way other humans heard stories about a place they'd never been, who had volunteered for this mission with the particular hunger of someone who has spent their whole life preparing for exactly one thing. HFY, Chinwei said gently. No more hiding. Yes, Dr. Tanaka. It's worth it. The hidden world had a name that the outside galaxy didn't know. It was called New Providence. It orbited a star that appeared in no galactic catalog, at coordinates that had been carefully and deliberately omitted from every map, every database, every piece of information that might have been accessible to galactic sensors. Finding it without prior knowledge of exactly where to look would have taken, the human geographers estimated, somewhere between 200 and 500 years of systematic searching. The humans had found it 800 years ago, when they'd needed a place to go. They'd built on it for 800 years. What they'd built was not, by the standards of a civilization that had been in space for 4,000 years, remarkable. It was not grand. The cities were functional. The government was complicated, as human governments always were, and had the particular chaotic efficiency of a system that was genuinely responsive to the people who lived under it. But it was large. New Providence had grown over 8 centuries into a world of 4 billion people. And around it, in the system it occupied, and in 17 other systems that the humans had quietly settled in the centuries since, all of them at coordinates equally omitted from galactic maps, there were 11 billion more. 15 billion humans. Developing, building, learning, arguing, making music and art and children and wars with each other and recovering from the wars and making more music. 800 years. And now, for the first time, the children of New Providence were looking at a galaxy their great-to-their 8th power grandparents had left, and some of them were afraid and some of them were excited, and all of them were watching the communications from the fleet with an intensity that crashed every public broadcast server 3 times in the first week. On New Providence, a 16-year-old girl named Maya Chin, no relation to the Admiral, though she'd been asked about it often enough that she had a stock response prepared, sat in her school's observation room and looked at the stars with an expression that her teachers would have described as elsewhere. She was elsewhere in a sense. She was thinking about the galaxy. She had grown up, like everyone on New Providence, with a relationship to the galaxy that was simultaneously intimate and abstract. She knew its history. She could name the major civilizations, describe their political systems, list their military capabilities as of the last reliable intelligence reports. She had studied galactic maps with the focus of someone who is studying a home they've never visited. She had never left New Providence. She had never been off-world at all. And now the fleet was out there, and Admiral Wei was talking to Veilthary commanders, and the Galactic Council was meeting in emergency session, and the galaxy that had been an abstract, beloved concept her whole life was suddenly, startlingly very real. "Hey," said her best friend Darius, dropping into the chair beside her. "You watching the feed?" "Yes." The Crin made a statement. Maya turned to look at him. "What did they say?" "That they want a formal meeting with the Admiral. Like a proper meeting, not just the station contact." He paused. "They also said something in an old human word. Caro. The commentators are losing their minds about it. Because the Crin using a human word means they've been thinking about us," Maya said slowly. "Not just as a problem to manage. As something they actually know." "Yeah." Darius looked at the stars. "Do you think it's going to work? The return?" Maya thought about the Admiral. She'd watched every available recording of Chen Wei that had been transmitted back to New Providence, had studied her the way she studied everything she cared about, with a focused, consuming attention that her mother called an obsession and her teachers called a gift. She thought about the Admiral saying, "We are not here to apologize for our absence." She thought about, "We are here to inform the galaxy that we are back." She thought about, "We will be watching." She thought about, "SYMJHY. No more hiding." "Yes," she said. "I think it's going to work." "How can you be so sure?" She looked at the stars for a long moment. "Because she hasn't apologized once," she said. "And she hasn't threatened anyone either. She's just stated facts. We're here. We're capable. We want peace. We're watching." She paused. "That's not the language of someone who's uncertain. That's the language of someone who's been thinking about this for a very long time and knows exactly what they're doing." Darius was quiet for a moment. "She's been thinking about it her whole career, probably. Her whole career and everyone before her's whole careers." Maya looked down at her hands. 800 years of thinking about the moment we came back. 800 years of preparing. We did the math. We built the ships. We learned the languages." She looked up. "The galaxy forgot about us. We never forgot about them." She stood up. "I'm going to apply for the diplomatic corps," she said. "I decided." Darius stared at her. "You're 16. So I'll apply in 2 years." She picked up her bag. "The return is just starting, Darius. We're going to be negotiating and building and arguing for decades. For generations, maybe." She looked at the observation window at the stars beyond it. "I want to be part of it." She walked out. And in the stars outside the window, 800 light-years away, the fleet that was her civilization's voice continued on its steady, unhurried approach toward a galaxy that was only now beginning to realize how much it had underestimated the humans. The meeting with the Sorvathi was the one Chinwei had dreaded. Not feared, she was careful about the distinction. Dread was the weight of anticipated difficulty. Fear was the anticipation of defeat. She didn't anticipate defeat. But she anticipated difficulty, and difficulty with the Sorvathi had a specific character that she'd spent years studying. The Sorvathi remembered things. All civilizations remembered, of course. But the Sorvathi had elevated memory into something that functioned almost like a religious practice. Their bureaucratic traditions maintained records going back 3,000 years. Their oral history, maintained alongside the written records, because Sorvathi culture didn't fully trust anything that existed in only one form, went back further. They knew, in precise detail, every slight, every defeat, every moment of humiliation or loss, stretching back to the earliest contact era. They remembered the Kalmara. They remembered the negotiating table and the terms, and the particular expression on the face of the human lead negotiator, described in contemporaneous accounts as the expression of someone who knows they've already won and is politely waiting for you to figure it out, that had entered Sorvathi political culture as a specific, named phenomenon, the Kalmara smile. They would be watching in this meeting for the Kalmara smile. Chinwei had practiced in the mirror not making it. She was not sure she had succeeded. The meeting was held on a neutral vessel, a Merath Federation diplomatic ship, the Reconciliation, which had been made available for exactly this kind of purpose. The Merath were the most genuinely neutral major civilization in the galaxy. Too small to be a significant military power, too economically integrated with everyone else to take sides, and possessed of a cultural tradition of mediation that they took very seriously. Grand Admiral Sorath Vel Khan led the Sorvathi delegation. She was older than Chinwei had expected, mid-70s by human estimation, with the sharp, angular features of high-caste Sorvathi and eyes that were the color of deep amber. She walked into the conference room of the Reconciliation with the posture of someone who has spent 50 years in military command and whose back has never fully received the memo that retirement exists. She looked at Chinwei. Chinwei looked at her. They were both women. They were both admirals. They had both spent their careers thinking about the relationship between military capability and political outcome. They had both, Chinwei suspected, spent a significant portion of the last several weeks thinking specifically about this meeting. Admiral Wei, Vel Khan said in standard Galactic that was precise and somewhat formal. Grand Admiral Vel Khan, Chinwei said with equal precision. They sat down. The mediating Merath diplomat, a gentle round-faced man named Counselor Afa who was visibly trying to appear calm and only partially succeeding, opened the session with the standard acknowledgments and protocols. Then both admirals looked at each other and both of them clearly had the same thought: skip the protocols. Our probes, Vel Khan said. Were returned intact, Chinwei said. You reviewed their data. We did. And found? That the Sorvathi are conducting a systematic survey of the outer reach, including several systems that were historically human. Chinwei's voice was level. Which we expected. Which, given our absence, is understandable. Vel Khan looked at her steadily. Understandable. Yes. Chinwei held the eye contact. We were gone. What were you supposed to do? Leave the space empty. Pause. Some of our military advisors, Vel Khan said carefully, interpreted the return of the probes as a threat. Some of our military advisors, Chinwei said, wanted to keep them. A pause of her own. I argued against it. I argued that returning them sent a better message. What message? That we're capable of taking things and choosing not to. Chinwei looked at her steadily. That restraint is a choice we're making, not a limitation we're accepting. The amber eyes didn't look away. And what does the Sorvathi theocracy do, Vel Khan said quietly, with that message? Ideally? The same thing I'd do with it if our positions were reversed. Chinwei leaned forward slightly. Take it seriously. Understand that we mean what we say. Understand that we're not here for the Kalmara Part 2. Something shifted in Vel Khan's expression. Not dramatically, not in a way that was immediately readable, but something moved. Our people have a name for a particular expression, she said. We call it the Kalmara smile. It belongs to a human negotiator 800 years ago. A specific expression that our records describe in enough detail that our psychologists have reconstructed it quite accurately. She paused. An expression of someone who believes they've already won. Chinwei was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said. I know about the Kalmara smile. We have records of it too from our side. She paused. It was not a good moment for human diplomacy. The war was already won and the negotiator, whose name was James Oduya, and who was brilliant and arrogant in about equal measure, couldn't quite conceal what he knew. Another pause. We've spent 800 years thinking about what we'd do differently. Not in terms of outcomes. In terms of the how. Velkan studied her. And have you found an answer? Several. Chinwei sat back slightly. The main one is, winning is not the goal. Having a galaxy you can actually live in is the goal. And those are not the same thing. She looked at the Sorvathi admiral. The Kael'mara ended with humans winning. It also ended with the Sorvathi spending the next 300 years looking for a way to change that outcome, and the humans spending the next 100 years being paranoid about the Sorvathi, and neither side trusting the other enough to build anything that lasted. She paused. That's not winning. That's just prolonging the fight in a different form. A long silence. What? Velkan said finally. Do you actually want? Not what does the fleet want? Not what does the human return mission want? What do you want? Chinwei recognized the distinction. She respected it. I want, she said honestly, for the return to succeed. Not militarily, that part is already done. I want it to succeed in 20 years, in 50 years, in a century. I want New Providence to be a name that means something in the galaxy, not a secret. I want human children to grow up knowing they're part of something larger than the world they're born on. She paused. I want the Sorvathi and the humans to be the kind of neighbors who don't have a war named after them that both sides are still bitter about 400 years later. Velkan was quiet. My advisors, she said finally, will say that's naive. My advisors, Chinwei said, will say it's essential. She looked at Velkan. I'm not asking you to trust us. I'm asking you to give us the space to demonstrate whether we're trustworthy. I'm asking for time. Pause. We've been patient for 800 years. We can be patient a little longer. The amber eyes studied her. The systems, Velkan said. The ones that were colonized in your absence. 3 of them are Sorvathi settlement systems now. 40 years of population. Infrastructure. We know. What do you intend to do about them? Negotiate, Chinwei said. Through the Galactic Council. Through established protocols. Not with a fleet. She paused. We won't pretend the colonization didn't happen. But we also won't pretend our claim to those systems is void because we were gone. Both things are true. We find a solution that acknowledges both things. That will take a very long time. Yes. Chinwei nodded. It will. Another silence. Then Velkan said something that Chinwei had not expected. My granddaughter, she said, is 7 years old. When she was 5, she found an old history text in my personal library. About the human contact era. About the wars and the negotiations and the first contact. Pause. She asked me if humans were real. Chinwei went very still. And I told her, Velkan continued, what I believed to be true, that humans had existed and that they were gone now. That their history was real but their time was over. The amber eyes were steady. She cried. She was 5. She thought the stories were sad, that a whole people had ended. Chinwei looked at her. What did you tell her, she said quietly, when you found out they hadn't? Velkan was quiet for a very long moment. I called her, she said. Last week. When the initial reports came through. Pause. I told her I'd been wrong. That they were real. That they were coming back. And? She said, Grandmother, can I meet one? A very long silence. Chinwei looked down at her hands for a moment. Then she looked up. When this is over, she said. When the formal meetings are done and the initial protocols are established, tell your granddaughter to send us a message. I will personally make sure that someone on our end writes back. The amber eyes were very still. Is that a diplomatic promise or a personal one? Velkan asked. Both, Chinwei said. If they're not the same thing, I'm not doing my job right. The session continued for 4 more hours. It was careful and complicated and sometimes uncomfortable and produced no final agreements, only a framework for further conversation. But at the end of it, Grand Admiral Sorvathi Velkan shook Chinwei's hand, the human greeting learned specifically for this meeting, and held it for a moment longer than the gesture strictly required. And neither of them smiled the Kael'mara smile. The Crin conversation was different from all the others. This was primarily because the Crin were different from all the others. Chinwei had spent the first week of the return having conversations that were, at their core, recognizable. Individual minds, individual agendas, the interplay of personal history and institutional position that characterized all diplomacy everywhere. Even the Sorvathi meeting, as charged as it had been a conversation between 2 people who wanted, underneath the formality, to be heard and to understand. The Crin were not a conversation between two people. The Crin were a conversation between one mind and approximately 47 billion. The interface was careful and skilled. The collective had clearly spent significant time developing a way to present itself to individual-minded species that was accessible without being dishonest. The voice was single, measured, thoughtful. But Qinwei had done her research and she knew what was behind it. An intelligence that was simultaneously having this conversation and roughly 3 trillion other conversations, that was processing information at a rate that made human computers look like counting beads, that experienced time and thought in ways that individual-minded species could approximate but never fully grasp. She had prepared differently for this meeting. The first thing she did when the channel was established and the formalities were done was say, "I know you've been analyzing us since the moment we appeared on your sensors. I know you've run models, probability assessments, capability estimates. I know you have a better understanding of our current military capacity than we have of yours." Pause. I'd like to skip the part where we pretend otherwise. There was a brief silence from the Crin interface. That is, the collective said, a refreshingly direct opening. We're refreshingly direct people. Historical data supports this conclusion. Another pause, shorter. Your assessment is correct. We have analyzed the fleet comprehensively. We have also, as you may have deduced, been monitoring human communications for approximately the past 600 years. Qinwei blinked. Just once. Very slightly. 600 years, she said. Your broadcasts were not perfectly contained, the Crin said, with a particular tone that serves, across species boundaries, as the functional equivalent of an apology that isn't quite an apology. We were not actively searching. But certain signals were detectable at close range, and the collective has always maintained border monitoring. So you knew about New Providence. We knew about a settlement. Approximate location. Population trend. General trajectory of development. Pause. We did not share this information with the Sorvathi or the Veiltheri. Qinwei was quiet for a moment. Why not? Several reasons, the Crin said. Primary among them, the collective assessed that the return of humans to the galactic stage was ultimately inevitable, and that controlled, prepared return was preferable to either indefinite concealment or forcible discovery. Pause. We also assessed, based on our monitoring, that the humans who would return were not the same as the humans who had left. What do you mean? The humans who left the galaxy 800 years ago were a species under significant internal and external pressure. The galactic situation was unsustainable. The military posture was reactive rather than strategic. There were internal political fractures that the collective's models suggested would eventually result in catastrophic failure if not addressed. Pause. The humans of New Providence are different. More cohesive. More patient. More deliberate. Another pause. The word caro, do it, move, begin, appears in human communications from the pre-absence era primarily in military and engineering contexts. In the communications we have monitored from New Providence over the past 2 centuries, it appears primarily in context of community building, long-term planning, and education. Qinwei looked at the interface column. You've been reading our mail, she said. We have been monitoring broadcast signals, the Crin said with precisely the same tone. There is a distinction. Is there? Legally speaking, yes. Another pause. Practically speaking, the distinction is perhaps less clear. Qinwei found herself, slightly to her own surprise, almost amused. You're more interesting than I expected, she said. You are somewhat different from our models, the Crin said. In positive directions. What directions? The willingness to acknowledge what the other party knows. The decision to skip performances that both parties understand are performances. A brief pause, which Qinwei had learned to recognize as the collective accessing a specific segment of its processing. The particular quality that your species has, of being able to hold 2 contradictory positions simultaneously without resolving the contradiction. You are capable and you are humble. You are strong and you are careful. You are angry about what was taken from you and you are choosing not to act on the anger. Pause. Individual-minded species typically find one of those pairs and discard the other. Humans appear to carry both. Qinwei was quiet for a moment. We've had 800 years to think about which mistakes we didn't want to repeat, she said. Yes, the Crin said. That is what we assessed. What does the collective want? Qinwei asked. From the return. From the negotiation. The collective wants stability, the Crin said. The galactic political order has been in a careful equilibrium for several centuries. The return of the humans disrupts that equilibrium. Disruption is not inherently negative, The collective's models allow for the possibility of a new equilibrium that is superior to the current one. But disruption is also not inherently positive, and unmanaged disruption has historically correlated with significant loss of life. You want us to be careful. We want you to be deliberate, the Crin said. Careful implies restraint. Deliberate implies intention. The distinction is important. Pause. Careful says, don't break anything. Deliberate says, know what you're doing when you change things. The Crin interface was quiet for a moment. We believe the humans are capable of deliberate. We are less certain about what form it will take. We're less certain too, Chin said honestly. That's one of the reasons we came back in a fleet rather than sending a diplomatic mission first. We needed the negotiating position. But we also needed to understand what we were returning to. She paused. We needed to see the galaxy again. For our own people. Yes, the Crin said. We understand. I suspect, Chin said, that you understand more about what we went through in the last 800 years than we're comfortable with. Possibly, the Crin said. We also understand something you may not have expected. Pause. The galaxy missed you. Chin looked at the interface. Not all of it, the Crin continued. Not the Sorvathi, not initially. But the galactic cultural record of the past 800 years shows a significant and measurable absence. Music that references the human contact era. Literature that explores imagined human perspectives. Political philosophy that cites human precedents. The civilizations of this galaxy spent 800 years knowing you were gone and spending significant creative and intellectual energy on what your presence had meant. Pause. That is not grief exactly. It is something the collective has not found a precise word for. Something between grief and anticipation. Between loss and the shadow of return. Chinwei was very still. There's a word for it, she said finally. In an old Earth language. The longing for a home you can't return to. Except you did return, the Crin said. Except we did. A silence that was, somehow, comfortable. Admiral Wei, the Crin said. The collective would like to make a proposal. Formal for the record. We would like to offer to serve as a neutral data repository and communication relay for the duration of the return negotiations. We have historical records that both human and galactic parties may find useful. We have the capacity to provide simultaneous, accurate translation across all relevant languages. And we have a vested interest in the negotiations succeeding. Pause. We propose a formal partnership. Chinwei looked at the column. The Crin are not known, she said carefully, for offering partnerships. No, the Crin agreed. We are not. Pause. The return of the humans is not a normal situation. Chinwei thought about it for approximately 4 seconds. Which was considerably less time than the collective had taken to make the offer but considerably more than the offer strictly required. I accept, she said. On behalf of the Human Space Force and pending Civilian Oversight Board approval, I accept. Efficient, the Crin said. We appreciate that. We're fairly efficient, Chinwei said. When the situation calls for it. Yes, the Crin said. We have noticed. The hardest part of the return was not the diplomacy. It was the first time a human ship went back to Earth. Chinwei had not planned to do this during the first week. She'd planned to keep it separate from the political negotiations. Personal, quiet, something done privately and not broadcast to the entire galaxy as a diplomatic statement or a show of strength. But the question had been inevitable. Her Civilian Oversight Board asked it in the first formal meeting. Her crew asked it through unofficial channels. And the people of New Providence asked it in every public forum and broadcast and message that found its way to the fleet. When are we going to see Earth? She'd promised, soon. When the initial contacts were stable. When the diplomatic framework was established enough to hold without her constant presence. The initial contacts were stable. The diplomatic framework was holding. So she went. Not with a fleet. With one ship, the Unbroken, and a small escort of 3 frigates. And she didn't make an announcement about where she was going, because she didn't want it to become a performance. She wanted it to be real. Earth was in what was now the border zone between human space, the outer systems they'd reclaimed in the first week of diplomatic negotiations, the ones with no populations to displace, and the edge of Veil Theory influence. It was not, technically, disputed territory. The Veil Theory had never formally claimed Earth, had in fact left it completely alone in the 800 years since the last expedition had found it changed and empty. There was something in the Veil Theory cultural record that looked, if you knew how to read it, like a specific and deliberate avoidance. As if they'd agreed without ever quite saying so, that some things should not be touched. The Unbroken dropped out of FTL at the edge of the solar system. Chinwei was on the bridge. She'd grown up hearing about this system the way people hear about places that exist in legend, with a reverence that was also a kind of disbelief. The sun yellow and warm and improbably ordinary looking. The planets in their patient orbits. The asteroid belt. Jupiter, vast and striped and oblivious to everything that had happened in the centuries since the last human had looked at it. And then Earth. Hold position here, Chinwei said. They held. The planet was blue. That was the first thing. Blue and white, with the brown and green of continents visible through the cloud cover, and it was beautiful, in the specific and terrible way that things are beautiful when they carry the weight of everything you were told to love before you knew what love was. Chinwei stood at the observation window for 4 minutes and didn't say anything. No one on the bridge said anything either. Then Lieutenant Commander Adeyemi said very quietly, "Admiral." The surface. She focused. The sensors were reading the surface. They'd been reading it since they dropped out of FTL, but she hadn't been looking at the data, she'd been looking at the planet, and now she looked. What am I seeing? Surface readings are different from the last expedition reports, Adeyemi said slowly. The damage we have on record, the scorching, the atmospheric changes, some of it is still there. But some of it is, he paused. It looks like the planet has been recovering. Chinwei stared at the data. Recovering. For 800 years. Without intervention. Ecosystems are re-establishing. Some of the damaged regions show significant regrowth. The atmosphere has partially restabilized. He looked up. It's not what it was. But it's alive, Admiral. The bridge was completely silent. Earth was alive. Chinwei pressed her hand against the transparent aluminum of the observation window. She thought about her grandmother's 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 grandmother, 8 generations back, a woman she'd never met, who had stood on Earth and breathed its air and felt its gravity and looked at its sky, and who had known that she was leaving and had not known when or if her people would come back. She thought about the 800-year promise that had been made and kept. She thought about New Providence and the 15 billion people there who were watching the fleet's transmissions and waiting, and who had never seen this planet that existed in their culture the way a home country exists in the culture of a diaspora, as something loved and lost and carried and passed down. Captain Okafor, she said. Admiral. I want a surface team. Geologists, biologists, atmospheric specialists. Full environmental protocols. We don't know what 800 years has done, and we don't want to introduce anything that doesn't belong there. She paused. And I want the survey documented completely. Every reading, every sample, every image. For the mission records? For New Providence. She took her hand off the window. The people back home have a right to know what their planet looks like now. She turned away from the window. And then, because she was a human and humans did not often say the things that mattered most at the moments that mattered most, but sometimes, when the moment was large enough, managed to anyway, she stopped. HFY, she said quietly. No more hiding. Not for Earth. Not for New Providence. Not for 15 billion people who had been keeping the most patient vigil in human history. No more myths. No more absence. The Unbroken settled into orbit around Earth. And for the first time in 800 years, there were humans in this system again. The surface team that went down to Earth came back up 3 days later. Chinwei had been aboard the shuttle for the landing herself. She hadn't announced this, hadn't planned to, and then had found herself walking toward the shuttle bay with her personal environmental kit and had simply kept walking. She'd stood on Earth. She'd stood on the actual ground of the actual planet, in a location that their record said had once been somewhere in what was called North America, on a continent in the northern hemisphere that had hosted billions of humans, and she'd looked at the sky, blue, improbably blue, the exact color she'd seen in every photograph and recording and simulation her whole life, and she'd felt the gravity, which was slightly stronger than New Providence's, and she'd breathed through the filter of her environmental suit because they couldn't confirm the atmospheric composition was safe yet, and she'd thought, this is where we came from. Not she personally. She'd never been here. Her parents hadn't been here. Going back 10 generations, none of her direct ancestors had set foot on this ground. But her people had come from here. This was the origin. The source. The root of the tree that had grown, in 800 years of exile and silence, into something new and strange and specifically, stubbornly human. She'd cried. Quietly inside her helmet where no one could see. She was not generally a person who cried. She'd allowed herself this one. When the surface team came back up, the lead scientist, Dr. James Obi, a small, methodical man who expressed excitement by becoming even more methodical, presented her with the preliminary report. The planet is recovering, he said. Not to pre-damage conditions, some of the changes are permanent. But significantly better than the last Veiltheri expedition reported. Ecosystems are rebuilding. Multiple biomes show evidence of adaptive regrowth. Several species that we believed extinct have re-established from remnant populations. He paused. Admiral, I want to be careful about this because the implications are significant, but I think, and the team agrees, that Earth could support human habitation again within 30 to 50 years, with appropriate restoration assistance. Chinwei looked at him. Are you telling me we can come home? Obi was quiet for a moment. I'm telling you that the option exists. Whether it's the right choice, whether New Providence remains the primary human world, whether Earth becomes a secondary settlement, whether it becomes a preservation site, those are decisions for the civilian government. He paused. But yes, Admiral. Biologically speaking, the planet is still here. It still works. He looked at the window at the blue curve of the world below. It waited for us. The message from Dr. Obi's report was transmitted to New Providence 40 hours later. The response took 40 hours to arrive. When it did, it was not from the civilian government. It was not from the oversight board. It was not from any official channel. It was from millions of private citizens. Messages flooding every frequency the fleet monitored, in every format, from recorded video to simple text to audio to images. Images of people on New Providence looking up at the sky of their world, the sky they'd been born under, the sky they'd always known, looking up and apparently thinking about a different sky. One message, from a 16-year-old girl who identified herself as Maya Chin, was a single line of text. Can we really go back? Chinwei read it 3 times. She sent back. Yes. It'll take time. And work. And patience. But yes. She thought for a moment, then added, HFY. And hit send. It was, perhaps inevitably, the Sorvathi who created the crisis. Not through Grand Admiral Vel Khan, who had returned from the reconciliation meeting with a measured, thoughtful report that had, to the visible surprise of several members of her government, recommended a policy of guarded engagement rather than opposition. Through someone else. Theocratic elder Dareth Vel Sorn was not, by any objective measure, the most powerful figure in the Sorvathi government. He was the 18th ranking member of the High Council, which meant he was important enough to have real influence but not so important that his actions automatically carried the weight of official policy. He was, however, the most vocal. And he had a following. 4 or 5 years before the return, Vel Sorn had been building a political movement within the Sorvathi theocracy around a single, clear idea. The twin sons of the Sorvathi home system were divine, and the species that had been blessed with their light were the natural center of the galactic order, and anyone who argued otherwise was either misguided or dangerous. It was not a new idea. Sorvathi history was full of versions of it, arising and receding with the political tides. What was new was Vel Sorn's particular timing. The years he'd chosen to build this movement had been years of increasing Sorvathi military capability and increasing Sorvathi territorial confidence, and the movement had drawn to itself a specific kind of person. Not the old, nostalgic kind who remembered the old days of unchallenged Sorvathi authority, but the young, energetic kind who were imagining a future of it. When the human fleet appeared, Vel Sorn's movement had a ready-made narrative. The humans were not a diplomatic opportunity. They were a test. The twin sons had sent them, or allowed them to return, as a test of Sorvathi resolve. And the correct response to a test was not to negotiate your way past it. The correct response was to pass it. This argument did not command a majority in the Sorvathi High Council. Vel Khan's more cautious approach had the support of the military establishment and most of the civil government. But it didn't need to command a majority to cause problems. It needed only to be loud enough, in enough of the right places, to push someone toward a decision that the majority would later have to manage. The decision came from a Sorvathi border commander named Captain Reith, young, ambitious, a vocal supporter of Vel Sorn's movement, who was stationed at one of the contested systems. A system called Kareth 7, which had been a human science outpost 800 years ago and had been slowly developing as a Sorvathi colony for the past century. The human diplomatic team had flagged Kareth 7 as one of the systems they intended to raise in formal negotiations. They had specifically, explicitly, clearly stated that they were not sending military assets to any contested system until after the diplomatic process had run its course. Captain Reith had taken this as weakness. And so, when a human survey ship, a small 200-person science vessel called the Restoration, arrived at Kareth 7 to conduct exactly the kind of preliminary survey that the diplomatic team had announced it would conduct, Reith had ordered it intercepted. Not destroyed. Not fired upon. Intercepted, surrounded by 3 Sorvathi warships, communicated to in terms that the Restoration's captain had described, in her report as demands framed as requests, and informed that Sorvathi permission was required for human ships to operate in Sorvathi space. Kara 7 was not officially Sorvathi space. The Restoration's captain, Commander Lee Rodriguez, who was 34 years old and had the particular quality of patience that came from being very good at science in conditions where science moved slowly, had handled it exactly correctly. She had responded formally, stated the diplomatic mandate, declined to move her ship on the grounds that she was in non-claimed territory, and transmitted a full report to Admiral Wei's fleet on an emergency channel. She had also, in what Chin Wei would later describe as the best piece of improvised diplomacy I have ever seen in 40 years of service, transmitted a copy of the report to the Crin's neutral relay network and CC'd the Galactic Council's public channel. Everything the Sorvathi captain had said was now on the Galactic public record. By the time Chin Wei received the report, it had been public for 90 minutes. Options, she said, standing in the fleet tactical room with the 4 most senior officers of the mission. Send a response fleet to Karath 7, Colonel Singh said. Make it clear we won't be intimidated. That, Chin Wei said, is the option that ends the diplomatic phase of the return. What else? Raise it formally with the Galactic Council, Captain Okafor said. Make the Sorvathi respond to a formal proceeding. They'll have to back down. Slower. What else? Contact Vel Khan directly, said Dr. Tanaka, who was in this meeting in her capacity as diplomatic liaison. She didn't order this. This is Vel Sorn's faction, not the mainstream Sorvathi government. Vel Khan may want to handle it herself, and giving her the space to do so might be more valuable than forcing a confrontation. Chin Wei looked at her. You think Vel Khan will distance herself from Ritha's action? I think Vel Khan spent 4 hours with you on a neutral ship and went back to her government and recommended engagement, Tanaka said. I think she's a professional who is dealing with internal political pressure and who will see this incident as something that makes her position harder, not something she endorses. Pause. I think she'll be angry about it. Chin Wei was quiet. All 3, she said. Simultaneously. Rodriguez holds position. No retreat but no provocation. Council notification goes out, formal, logged, unemotional. And I call Vel Khan. She looked at the room. But Vel Khan first. In the next 10 minutes before the council notification processes. Why Vel Khan first? Chin Wei thought about the meeting on the reconciliation. About a grandmother who had told her granddaughter that humans were gone, and then had to call her back and say she'd been wrong. About amber eyes that had held hers steadily and asked, "What do you actually want?" Because, she said, she deserves to hear from us before she hears from everyone else. The call to Vel Khan lasted 12 minutes. Vel Khan's expression when she received the report of Ritha's action was something that Chin Wei would later describe to Dr. Tanaka as the most expensive kind of anger, the kind that's 90% directed inward. She'd already known about it. Of course she had. The Sorvathi military chain of command moved quickly. This was not authorized, Vel Khan said. There was no softening of the statement, no diplomatic hedging, no while the situation is complex or while we understand the concerns of our officers at the frontier. Just, this was not authorized. I know, Chin Wei said. What do you require from us? Reith withdraws from the Restoration's position. Formal acknowledgement that Karath 7 is a subject for council negotiation, not unilateral Sorvathi determination. Pause. And a statement, through official channels, not just private communication, that the incident does not represent Sorvathi government policy. The statement, Vel Khan said carefully, will be internally complicated. I know. Vel Sorn has supporters on the council. I know. Pause. You're not making this easy. Grand Admiral, Chin Wei said as gently as she could while meaning everything she said, I am not in a position to make your internal politics easy. I am in a position to make this situation worse or better. I want it to be better. But that has to include a clear signal from the Sorvathi government that this kind of action is not acceptable. She paused. Not for our benefit. For yours. If Vel Sorn's faction thinks they can push individual provocations without consequence, they will keep doing it. And eventually one of those provocations will find someone on our end who is less patient than Commander Rodriguez. A long silence on the line. I will handle Vel Sorn, Vel Khan said. I believe you, Chin Wei said honestly. Another silence. Karo, Vel Khan said. Chin Wei looked at the screen. The Sorvathi Grand Admiral had just used a human word. The same word the Crin had used. An 800-year-old human word meaning, begin. Mo. Do the thing. Caro, Chinwei said. The call ended. And 16 minutes later, Retha's ships withdrew from the restoration's position. And 20 minutes after that, a formal statement was issued from the Sorvathi High Council, signed by Vel Khan and 11 other senior military and civil figures, including several Vel Sorn had counted as allies, acknowledging that Karath 7 was a subject for negotiation and that unilateral military action was inconsistent with Sorvathi diplomatic commitments. Vel Sorn issued a counter-statement, furious and sharp. Nobody from the mainstream Sorvathi government responded to it. In the council chamber, when the incident was formally reviewed, the Merath mediator observed that the situation had been resolved without violence, without formal sanctions, and with both parties maintaining their stated diplomatic positions. It was, he said, a promising sign. The formal negotiations lasted 11 months. They were not at any point easy. They involved 14 separate working groups, 3 emergency council sessions, 1 very serious near incident involving a Veiltheri survey team and a human border patrol that came uncomfortably close to an exchange of weapons fire before both commanding officers independently decided to stand down and report upward, and an ongoing, exhausting, occasionally brilliant and occasionally deeply frustrating attempt to resolve 800 years of accumulated territorial, historical, and cultural questions through the medium of people sitting in rooms together and trying very hard to communicate. Chinwei was present for most of it, though as the months passed she increasingly delegated the day-to-day negotiation work to her diplomatic team, Dr. Tanaka, who turned out to be as brilliant in practice as she was in theory, and a group of young officers and civilians who had grown up on New Providence dreaming of exactly this and were now living it. She focused on the things that needed her specifically: the political crises, the relationship management, the moments when the negotiation was about to break down and needed someone with enough authority and enough weight to hold it together. There were more of those moments than she'd hoped and fewer than she'd feared. What emerged after 11 months was not perfect. It was never going to be perfect. 800 years of absence, 800 years of change, 800 years of the galaxy building itself into a shape that hadn't left space for humans. You could not undo all of that in a year of negotiation. You could not rewrite 800 years in 11 months. But what emerged was, in Dr. Tanaka's considered opinion, the most comprehensive diplomatic framework produced in the known galaxy in the past 4 centuries, and Chinwei was inclined to agree. The key elements. Human sovereignty was formally recognized in all systems that had been human-settled prior to the absence and had no current populations, 23 systems in total, including the solar system. These were immediately placed under human governance, with a restoration and resettlement timeline to be determined by the human civilian government. 9 additional systems, the ones that had been colonized by other civilizations during the absence, were placed in a new category, joint heritage systems. With a negotiated governance framework that recognized both the original human claim and the rights of current populations. The framework would be reviewed in 25 years. The 3 Sorvathi systems that had direct conflict with human claims were given a 50-year negotiation timeline, with interim arrangements for both Sorvathi settlers and human claimants, and a Crin-mediated oversight process. The human Space Force fleet was formally registered with the Galactic Council as the defense arm of the newly re-recognized human government. Its current size was noted, and was, Chinwei observed, noted with a certain studied neutrality by every other civilization's military representatives. And Earth, the one thing that every other civilization's representatives treated with a particular, careful delicacy, was designated a heritage world, human sovereign territory with an open cultural access agreement that allowed representatives of any registered galactic civilization to visit for educational and cultural purposes. It was, Vel Khan said, in what had become something resembling a regular communication between the two of them, probably better than it deserved to be. "I'll take that as a compliment," Chinwei said. "It was intended as one," Vel Khan said. "In the Sorvathi way." The day the framework was formally signed, Chinwei was standing at the observation window of the Unbroken Bridge. She had been standing there on and off for 11 months. She thought about the beginning. About the long-range array counting ships and not stopping. About Sarath Vel Doran's voice over an 800-year-old frequency, careful and afraid and professional. About the reconciliation and Vel Khan's amber eyes. About the Crin saying Hiraeth. About Earth, blue and alive and waiting. About a 16-year-old girl on New Providence who had asked, "Can we really go back?" She pulled out her personal communicator. Found the message. Found her reply. "Yes, it'll take time. And work. And patience. But yes. A SYMJHY. She thought about all of it. And she thought, yes, it had been worth it. It was not finished, it was barely started. The resettlement would take decades. The negotiation frameworks would need constant maintenance. There would be more crises, more moments when everything threatened to unravel, more people on every side who would push in directions that made everything harder. Velsorn was still out there building his movement. There were humans on New Providence who felt the diplomatic framework had given away too much, who wanted faster resettlement, who were angry about the joint heritage systems, who didn't understand why the return had to be this slow and careful and measured. There would be work. There would be a lot of work. But the framework was signed. The fleet was registered. Earth was designated. The human government, which had operated in exile, in secret, in the beautiful and functional cities of New Providence for 8 centuries, was formally re-recognized in the galactic community. The humans were back. The myths had arrived. And they were real. 23 years after the framework signing, Maya Chin stood on Earth. She was 39 years old now, with the kind of face that had been described by people who knew her as built for thinking about multiple things at once, and the particular posture of someone who had spent 15 years in diplomatic service and another 8 years as the human government's senior liaison to the Galactic Council. She stood on the actual ground. Not in a suit. The atmospheric restoration work of the past decade had progressed far enough that the air in this region was safe to breathe without filtration, which had been a milestone celebrated on New Providence with a level of enthusiasm that had slightly surprised her, until she'd thought about what it meant. You could breathe on Earth without a suit. You could stand on the ground of the origin world and breathe its air. She breathed it now. Deeply. She thought it tasted like possibility. Around her, the restoration crews had been working for 20 years on this particular site. Once a major city, a place called Chicago on the continent of North America, on the largest landmass of the Northern Hemisphere. What had been there before the absence was gone, mostly. The structures hadn't survived 800 years of no maintenance. But the restoration crews had done something interesting with the ruins. They hadn't cleared them. They'd worked around them, letting the new growth incorporate the old bones of the city, the way a forest incorporates a fallen tree. It looked like a place that knew what it had been and had decided to become something new anyway. She thought, that's appropriate. Her communicator pinged. She looked at it. The message was from Vel Khan. Not Grand Admiral Sorvathi Vel Khan anymore. She'd retired 3 years ago at the age of 91, after a career that had ended as one of the most significant diplomatic figures in Sorvathi history. The retirement had been, by all accounts, her own choice and entirely genuine. She told Chen Wei in one of their increasingly regular communications that she was tired and had earned the right to be tired. The message was brief. My granddaughter is 12 now. She reminds me every month that you promised. Maya smiled. She wrote back. Tell her the human government's cultural exchange program starts accepting applications for the next cohort in 3 weeks. She can apply. Pause. Then. She'll be the youngest applicant by several years. She'll be exactly the right age, Maya wrote back. Tell her, Caro. She put the communicator away. She looked at the sky. The sky of Earth was a particular shade of blue that didn't quite match any other sky she'd ever seen, and she'd seen a lot of skies in 15 years of diplomatic travel, Veiltheri worlds and Merath stations, and the particular soft amber sky of the Sorvathi home system, which had looked exactly as the old records described and had made her think of Vel Khan's eyes. No sky was like Earth's. She thought about Admiral Wei. Chen Wei, the admiral, her admiral, the woman who had led the fleet back and negotiated the framework and stood on this ground, this exact ground 23 years ago, and breathed the air through a filter and cried quietly inside her helmet. The admiral had retired 4 years ago to New Providence, to a small house near the sea where, by all accounts, she read a great deal and responded to messages with a speed that suggested she was not as retired as the official announcement had suggested. She'd sent Maya a message, when Maya's appointment as senior council liaison had been confirmed. Don't let them make myths out of us, she'd written. The return only works if it keeps being real. Keep it real. Maya had kept it real. It had not been easy. The 23 years since the framework had been exactly what Chen Wei had predicted. Work. Constant, complicated, necessary work. The joint heritage systems had been contentious for a decade before settling into something that functioned. The Sorvathi political pendulum had swung back toward Velsorn's faction twice, and twice Vel Khan's successors had managed to swing it back. There had been 2 serious military incidents and one that had required Maya personally to spend 11 days mediating in a room with representatives who had stopped speaking to each other. There had also been breakthroughs. Scientific collaborations that hadn't existed before and were producing results that benefited everyone. Cultural exchanges, including the one that Velkan's granddaughter was about to apply for, that were slowly, carefully, building the kind of mutual understanding that military capability could establish but couldn't sustain. Trade agreements. Research partnerships. The gradual, incremental development of something that was not quite trust but was approaching it from the right direction. The Crin's relay network had become a cornerstone of the new galactic communications infrastructure, a development that the collective had noted, with its customary dry precision, as consistent with the collective's original assessment of the partnership's value. Sareth Vel-Doran had been promoted to admiral and now commanded the Veiltheri diplomatic fleet. She and Maya had dinner when Maya was in Veiltheri space, which was often enough that they'd moved past formality into something that Maya thought might carefully be described as friendship. And Earth was here. Earth was here, alive and breathing and slowly, patiently becoming something again. Maya bent down and picked up a handful of soil. Dark, rich soil. Wet from a recent rain. The smell of it was something that she'd never smelled before but recognized, from 10,000 generations of genetic memory, from the deep, pre-linguistic part of the human brain that remembered what soil was supposed to smell like. This is where we came from. She closed her fist around the soil. She thought about 800 years. She thought about 15 billion people on New Providence who were, in the generation after Maya's, beginning to have a different relationship with the galaxy, not a longing for something lost, not the particular ache of exile, but something more like the easy confidence of someone who knew where they belonged. They belonged here. In the galaxy. In the stars. On Earth and on New Providence and in the disputed heritage systems and in the council chamber, and at the negotiating tables and in the research stations and on the cultural exchange ships, and in the letters Velkan's granddaughter was going to write. HFY. No more hiding. Carol. Begin. Move. Do the thing. Maya opened her hand. The soil fell dark and rich back to the ground. She looked up at the blue sky. At the yellow sun. At the planet that had waited 800 years and was, slowly, becoming a home again. She thought about Admiral Wei standing in this same spot 23 years ago, crying quietly in her helmet, thinking about a promise kept. She thought about a 16-year-old girl on New Providence looking up at the stars and asking, "Can we really go back?" And she thought, yes. Not just back to Earth. Back to the galaxy. Back to the stars that had told stories about them for 800 years and called them myths and written them off and then, one long-range array morning, had looked up and found the myths were arriving. Back to the place where humans belonged because humans belonged wherever humans decided to be, and they had decided. She straightened. She had a council session in 4 hours, a dinner with the Veiltheri ambassador at 7, and a message she needed to write to Velkan's granddaughter about the application process. She had work to do. She always had work to do. She was human. She turned and walked back toward the shuttle. Above her, the blue sky of Earth held the yellow sun. Around her, the ruins and the new growth breathed together. And in the stars beyond the atmosphere, in the galaxy that had once called them myths, human ships moved through the lanes of known space with the easy, unhurried confidence of people who had come home. Not triumphantly. Not aggressively. But undeniably. Completely. Finally. Home. Indy. Clapperboard epilogue, Voices from the Stars. Ensign Pavel Vel-Doran, later Captain Pavel Vel-Doran, later still director of the Veiltheri Human Cultural Archive, would spend the rest of his career studying human history, language, and culture. He was widely credited with the most complete translation matrix for human pre-absence texts ever produced, and would say in every interview he gave until he retired, that the most important thing he ever did was make a cup of tea. When pressed on what he meant, he would smile and say, "When the Admiral's shuttle docked on Kale 9, I gave them tea. Veiltheri tea. And she drank it without flinching and said it was interesting, which was the most diplomatic thing I have ever heard anyone say about Veiltheri tea. Pause. It told me everything I needed to know about humans." Grand Admiral Sorvathi Vel-Khan would be remembered, in both Sorvathi and human histories, as the figure who chose the harder right over the easier wrong at the exact moment it mattered. Her memoir, published 2 years before her death, was titled The Kael'Mara Smile, a title that caused significant confusion in the Sorvathi press, who expected a war story, and found instead something considerably more complicated. The dedication read, "For my granddaughter who asked if she could meet a human." She did. She married one. The Crin Collective issued no public statement on the conclusion of the return negotiations. They had, after all, been involved throughout and had no need for announcements. They did, however, update their historical records with a designation that had previously been blank. Next to the human species entry in the field labeled status, they changed the entry from absent to returned. And in their deepest memory banks, in the section that contained the oldest records, the 800-year-old drive signatures from the last time human ships had crossed Crin borders, they added a note. The note said they came back. As assessed. Rear Admiral Chen Wei died on New Providence at the age of 97, in the small house near the sea, with the sound of the water outside her window and 6 people she loved in the room. Her last coherent sentence, delivered with the same precise unhurriedness that had characterized everything she'd ever said, was, "Tell Maya, the sky here is the wrong blue. Earth is better." She was smiling when she said it. She was still smiling. Maya Chin received the message 30 minutes after it was sent, in the council chamber on the Galactic station, in the middle of a session about trade route renegotiation that was going to take at least another 3 hours. She read it twice. She excused herself for 5 minutes. When she came back, she was composed and professional and entirely herself. She was also wearing, for the rest of the session, the expression of someone who is carrying something important and does not intend to put it down. Sareth Vel Doran, sitting across the chamber, recognized the expression. She'd seen it on the Admiral's face 20 years ago on the observation deck of Station Kale 9, looking at a fleet that the galaxy had thought was myth. The expression of someone who knows exactly what they're carrying and knows exactly where they're going. The galaxy thought they were myths. Until their fleet arrived. And then, slowly, messily, imperfectly, magnificently, everything changed. As things do. As things do when humans decide they are tired of being absent. Caro. Of SYMJHY. Begin. The end.